Hi, friends. Logan Clements here with the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode 204, we are all talking about how you can start to freelance in events. I don't know how we have not talked about this in its own episode, but we did realize that looking back. And we've incorporated a number of questions that you submitted via our Instagram or our conference last December. And we just didn't have enough time to dive into your specific questions. So, whether you are someone who is new to the event industry, or you're thinking about pivoting into event freelancing, or you even work full time in events and just want to add some freelancing on the side, this episode is for you. There was so much content in this talk that we are going to have to do a follow up episode diving even more in. But this is a great starting point if you're wanting to learn more about how to start freelancing in events. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events Podcast. We are thrilled, as always, to be with you. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co-hosts, joined by Logan Clements. And our episode today is going to be a fun one. I think we're going to have a good conversation because we are talking about how to start freelancing in events. Haven't really covered this topic in detail, so here we are to do it today, and we'll see how much we can get through because there's a lot to talk about. Before we get into it, we have our conversation starter. So Logan, what's a go-to meal or treat that instantly puts you in a good mood?
The hard part, Mary, here is there's multiple things. I just shuffled through probably four different options as we started recording this episode. So I'm going to go with honestly dumplings. Any kind of dumpling, I'm going to probably be, it's just makes me happy. My go to is the Trader Joe's frozen pot stickers that I know on a stovetop how to fry the bottoms and steam the tops is my go to. Make it work from home, making myself lunch. That's just going to make me happy. So I'd say dumplings. Mary, what's yours?
I mean, you said, well, in this question, it was treat. So I went to treat in my brain, which is not on the same, palette as a dumpling, but no judgment. This is a safe space, everybody. Okay. One of my favorite treats right now are Peeps. I freaking love them. I never thought I would come to this moment in my life, but here we are, and I love them. So honestly, that puts me in a good mood. I see them in the store and I get all the different flavors that they have, and it makes me so happy. So I'm going to say a Peep.
And if you listener are like me and you hate peeps, just know, Mary, there's less people competing with you for the peeps because I'm good. I love marshmallows, but I don't know why peeps not my thing. But
But maybe you haven't tried like the cotton candy flavored ones.
not my fave. But I
We'll
love if
see
it
about
puts
that.
you in a mood instantly.
It does.
And listeners, I hope you think about what your answer to this question would be. Go to meal or treat. Because if you're in a particularly stressful time, make sure you have some of these on hand if it's something that's going to put you in an instant good mood. So we chose this week's topic because we realized we haven't covered freelancing in events specifically. We have talked a little bit about how we get clients, and I know a lot of things in the jargon in the industry. We kind of use freelancing and self-employed interchangeably, but specifically, we are going to be talking about freelancing in the sense that you're getting hired by another event planner or event company as a freelancer to execute an event. And this is really just going to be an overall starter episode. We have scheduled in another follow-up episode later on in this season just because we started listing out the questions and there were way too many of them. Some of these questions are from you listeners who sent us via Instagram, and we had a couple questions we didn't get to in our conference in December that we wanted to make sure we dedicate time to. So, listeners, you might recognize your question you've submitted about freelancing. So, Mary, we go broad. Just to start, get your Google search bar ready. What do we mean when we say freelancing at events?
I didn't Google this one. Can you believe it? I was like ready to go without the Google, but now I feel like I need Google to back
Do you
me
want me to
up.
tap dance for our listeners while you Google it really quickly?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely.
Well, listeners, while Mary pulls that up, I would define freelancing. I kind of cat's out of the bag. I said it earlier of like when you're working as an individual for another event planner or event company or event agency, you are a freelancer. Again, that could be independent contractor. You might hear that interchangeably, but that is something on the podcast. I feel like we often give people advice about how to get into events is to start by freelancing. You can do this in addition to your full-time job, especially if you're pivoting from one career, one industry into the event industry. Freelancing is a great way to do that. Mary, have we pulled up our Google search?
Hold it up. Yeah, I don't know that I actually love the definitions on this one, so I'm piecing them together. But the Google says someone who works independently to plan and coordinate events specific to, event planning, often for clients, may specialize in specific areas.
Google. That was a miss for me. Yeah.
I know.
Too general.
Yeah, it wasn't good enough. And there was another one that I thought was even worse, delivering an event from conception to completion.
I feel like they're mixing it up with event planner. That's not a good
Yeah,
that's listeners,
exactly.
don't use that definition. The first time ever, Google has failed us with giving us a relevant definition,
I agree with this. Womp womp. We'll just have to we'll just have to speak from experience instead.
which Mary brings us to our next question because I do feel like examples are helpful for our listeners is what are some examples of event roles that you've filled recently as a freelancer yourself or maybe with your company you've hired freelancers for?
Yeah, I'll start with the hiring first. No matter how I try to get away from it, we still have to hire freelancers for events because we often are providing more than 2 people on site day of. And so that just schedule wise usually means we have to bring in a freelancer. So that's usually just on site. That type of like execution role, that role will vary from like registration or volunteer support or exhibitor support. So, general like event types of roles. So those are the most common ones that we hire for. Recently, I still freelance as well. And so I recently was hired to do coordination for a gala, and so I was hired on as a representative for that company to do that. But then also there are longer contracts as well where I've been a freelancer under a company. So I'm using their email, representing as them. And I was doing like speaker management for like 3 months before an event. So those are some examples that I've done this year. Logan, what about you? Because this is also a lot of what you do. So I think you probably have many examples.
Yeah, freelance roles. I mean, show caller, producer, associate producer, stage manager, deck manager. Those get used interchangeably. They sometimes call the stage the deck. You can have a graphics operator is usually freelance. Your video operator could be freelance. Your volunteer manager could be freelance. There's honestly, I think of almost any role you could be freelance apart from I don't think I've seen like an account director at in my they're usually like an internal person, meaning they work full time for the company, so they manage the whole account. But then they could hire even from like executive producer down to producer, associate producer, production coordinator, all of those things. Those could all be freelancers. I've even had like you could be an event assistant and you could be a freelancer. Mary, what were you going to jump in with?
Not from like dying on this hill, but I re-Googled it and I feel like I like this better by keeping it broad. Let me know your thoughts. It says a form of self-employment where individuals offer their skills and services to clients on a project by project basis, often without long-term commitments. And I like the project by project explanation more because one of my questions, like at the beginning of starting my business, is like, what's the difference between freelancing and working for someone part time? And sometimes there is some overlap there, depending on just like laws and stuff. So I do like the representation of project by project. And now, a word from one of our partners. This episode of the Better Events podcast is sponsored by Eventny, an all in one event management software designed to take the stress out of event management.
Our favorite part of Eventny is how easy they make organizing vendors. With their solution, you can easily create, collect, and approve applications, send contracts, and track invoices.
They even offer liability insurance for vendors, and you can use their interactive map to place vendors at their booth, which is a huge time saver. Eventny is extending an exclusive offer to Better Events listeners for $500 off a pro annual plan.
To access this discount, click the link in our show notes. And hurry, this deal is available for a limited time only, so don't wait to take your event to the next level and outfox chaos with Eventny. And now back to the episode. Jumping in now to kind of talking about what are some of the pros of being an event freelancer. Mary, do you want to start off with what are some of the pros? We'll get into the cons after that.
Yeah, well, I have to remind myself we're talking about freelancing, which means that you own your own business and that you do your own thing. Right, Logan? Would you like, is that a fair statement to say?
Yeah. Yeah, the line I don't know I don't love to always say it's owning your own business because I know a lot of freelancers who like don't identify as their own
Right.
business owner. They are. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to talk taxes, it's like they're a 1099. They're not part-time, they're not full-time, but they are someone you pay, and they're not a vendor. They're like an individual you're paying to help with your event. I've mentioned to some freelancers out there like, "Oh, you're a business owner." And they're like, "No, I'm not. I'm just a freelancer." So,
That's interesting.
in the eyes of the tax law, we all are business owners if we freelance. But yeah, we're talking about, and freelancing can also be, Mary, like talking about for some of our listeners here, because we get some outreach about this, is like people who work full time elsewhere and they want
Yeah.
to freelance on the side. So,
Right.
thinking about the
Okay.
pros from that context, what would you list or
Yeah.
some of your top reasons why you still, even as a business owner, you still freelance?
Yeah, I think it's the freedom component, but I wrapping that into, like, kind of a bigger business thing. I'm having a really hard time separating this from business, to be honest. But yeah, I think it's freedom, and then it's also the ability to have change. I'm reading a book right now. I'll try to look up the name and mention it later, but I think it's called How to Be Everything, and it's about generalists. And it's pro generalist, so it's like being good at all of the things. And I feel like with freelancing, that's you can definitely be a niche freelancer. Don't get me wrong, but that's one of the things that I like about it is that I'm able to go in and do a lot of different things with different projects and different people. And that change is really exciting for me. And so that's what I like about it most. Logan, what about you?
I think freelancing is great to get experience, like Mary said in that definition. Even like it's a short term, usually just for an event, which could be as simple as the day of. You're just doing a 1 day gig to the months leading up to, or month or weeks leading up to the event. So it's short term. So that's really nice. I joke I speed date companies, and that's when I first started working. I freelanced, I did marketing, and I also did events, and so it was a way to like dip my toe in the water of working events. But also, then you don't like, as a freelancer, I didn't necessarily feel like I had to formally market myself to clients. I was more just trying to network with event companies, event agencies, event planners. They're winning the business. And then I'm just making sure I'm on their list of people they want to hire for that event. So it takes a little bit of the pressure off of you to not feel like you have to buy Google ads or Facebook ads about your business. Like, that's not the structure as a freelancer. You're a little bit more behind the scenes. And I did just like the variety of it, because I was not committed to a company working full time. I was able to kind of pick and choose and go where my interests were, which have evolved over the time, and something that like I constantly still like freelancing for projects. My last reason of top of mind reasons for pros is I get to work on really big events that I never would have pitched as a business myself, because they're millions of dollars of budget, and I would not want to have be liable for that as a business. But I would love to be a part of it, and so I can get brought in as a freelancer and, yes, get white labeled, which white labeled meaning I'm getting labeled as the other agency. So say agency ABC, that's a company. They hire me. I'm on site. As far as everybody else is on site knows, I am Logan who works at agency ABC. And I don't mind doing that if that gets me to that event. So that's part of it that I like, that I get to get experience at bigger things than what I would go after as like Logan Strategy Group, the company.
I love that you called out the idea of bigger events. Absolutely. That's one of the things for me too. Cause I'll have, just like friends and family say, "Oh, I just saw that you were in San Diego. Like, how are you? How it's so cool that your business is doing that." And I'm like, "Thank you. But also, I'm freelancing an event." So, like, anytime you see me travel or somebody has the budget to have me travel from Seattle to go somewhere else, it's probably a larger event, which means I'm freelancing. And so, yes, I completely concur with that as well. But on the opposite side of the pros, there are also some cons to being an event freelancer. So, Logan, what would you say are some of those cons for you?
Cons can be, it can feel very intimidating to get started, because it is so much of relationship building and people just knowing who you are. These jobs are not often posted online on Indeed or anything like that. It's just getting on the radar of planners and companies. So that can just feel really daunting when you're first starting out, because you're like, Logan, Mary, where do we even find these opportunities? Like that is very normal, and it just takes time. Hard part too is it can sometimes feel like feast and famine, meaning feast, there's so many events and they all want you the same dates. How could you possibly choose? Or you're having to say no to a lot of things. Or it can feel like you have a really slow period, a really slow time. I was on an industry call earlier this week where someone was saying, with all the strikes that are happening in TV, all the freelancers that work in like supporting TV shoots and sets, they're having trouble finding work because there's not a lot of TV shoots happening. So those are things that can feel like they're happening. I will constantly tell you there are more than enough events for everybody. You just need to kind of continue to put yourself out there. But that's really real as a freelancer, not having that steady paycheck then. So this is why I think a lot of people reach out to us on the podcast are thinking about freelancing on the side, like a great thing to do if you're a 9 to 5 or Monday through Friday. You could freelance at events over the weekend. Now that's going to take you out of certain projects, because I'm finding a lot of my corporate shows are during the week. They're not over the weekend. And so if you're trying to freelance for me for something, I can't use you because I need you to be able to travel from Tuesday to Friday. I also know some full-time people that love sports. And so every year they take off the 2 weeks for the US Open tennis to go work tennis. And they use their PTO, their vacation from their job to go do that because they're just so passionate about it. So that is a way you're still freelancing and having a full-time job if you want. So there's like, that's a pro con because I feel like there's so many different ways to do it that there's not a cookie cutter. Like if you follow these 3 steps, you'll be a successful freelancer. That doesn't exist. That can just feel intimidating. Mary, what would you add to that for cons?
Yeah, those cons that you mentioned are my biggest cons for sure, but some others as well is just like travel tiredness, like so much travel and the strain from doing so. Because as we've just identified, a lot of those roles are travel related, but a lot of them are local too. So if you're not into travel, you can still be successful in this. For me, it is that travel strain. So that's one. And then also another thing is not having a set team all the time. And I think it's a joy to work with different people because you can, if you love them, that's great. And if you don't have to see them again. But there's a joy and consistency that you may not always get in freelancing. Now, I think over time, there is a pro to this as well because you make connections and you can keep working with the same people over time. And it's really joyful to be able to work with colleagues and friends. So you can still experience that. I just think sometimes it's a bit harder to establish when you're freelancing.
Other con I would give you is taxes. So when you find out as a freelancer, they're like, we're going to pay you $1,000 to come work this event for 2 days. You're like, wow, that's so great. I made $1,000 in 2 days. No, you didn't. 30% or so of that, that's going for taxes. But you're not going to pay that until you file your taxes at the end of the year. So that is something what I feel like I early days freelanced. I just didn't factor in that. And then as I run myself as a small business, so I have certain expenses every single month, no matter how many events I'm doing or not doing, those are back end expenses I have to pay. So again, my freelance, whatever my rate is, isn't necessarily what I personally as Logan get to take home and spend on fun things. I have to allocate it towards some of those expenses. So those are part of just being, I'd say, some of the cons of being an event freelancer. Hopefully, we didn't bring you down too much because you will notice both Mary and I still freelance events. So clearly, the pros kind of outweigh the cons for us. But again, I've heard from different people like some people love it, some people hate it, some people only do it a little bit, and then there's people I know who do this all the time. That is their only thing they do is freelancing at events. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. So, Mary, for our next question, for recent grads or maybe folks who don't have any events experience, what's your advice where they should start if they're interested in freelancing at events?
Okay, so I look back to how I started and I got 70, 80% of my freelance gigs from other event planners specifically. And so they're like us or what I just mentioned, like we have to hire people to just come on site all the time. So it's just being able to know who those people are, who are good people, who are consistent people. So if you're interested, start reaching out to some companies around you that do events. And I'm sure that you over time you'll figure out the roles that you're more interested in, but you could start with that. I think over time you'll also figure out the rates of those local companies and if you want to work for them, but it's a really fabulous way to start that I found a lot of success in at the beginning, so I would absolutely recommend that. Logan, what about you? Where would you suggest they start?
Same exact answer. Yeah. Start with the people who are doing what you think you want to do and ask freelance capacity for them or anyone else in their network who's looking for someone. That is just a great way to get your hands dirty and actually experience this thing you conceptually think you want to do. Which I just believe events is such a tough industry that you don't know you like it until you're kind of in it. You also don't know if you don't like it until you're in it. So that way you're not something like if you're making the transition, it's nice to do this on the side while you're still in your full-time gig. So maybe you're not jumping 100% into freelance life without knowing if you like it or not. You can kind of dip your toe in. And then those people to like, if both Mary and I feel like there's people who helped us out in our earlier days that have continued to be people we still work with, get business from, refer each other to, years later. So you never know. It's not just you're doing that work at the start. That's building the foundation that you can grow on for years to come.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We have another question from a listener regarding this topic, which is I'm working full time in events but want to start freelancing on the side. Where do I start?
You're working full time in events. You're already in events already. I think I would go back and look at your contract as a full time person to make sure there's no non compete clause, or maybe there's something that you're not allowed to work the same types of industry events. So maybe you're a corporate planner. Maybe you have to stay away from working for other corporate events, but there's so many other events out there that you could be doing. You could be doing nonprofits, sports festivals, community events, different ones. And then I would start networking again with the people who are doing those events that you want to do. And networking is such a it's a buzzword, but I mean literally like on LinkedIn, finding these people, sending them LinkedIn messages, or if their emails listed on their website, sending them an email, offering to buy them a coffee or buy them a drink or take up 20 minutes on a Zoom call and just literally trying to meet these people. I would also, if you are someone who has the steady income to work of working full time in events, maybe offer to volunteer at one of your local industry events as a way to meet more of the independent planners that maybe if you're in house, you're not meeting those people who do a lot of that freelance work. And just start again getting the word out however you're allowed to. If you're not allowed to post about it on social media because you're working full time, at least verbally, as many event pros you can say you're doing it. That's like a mistake I made when I first started my business. I think I thought a lot of people just knew that I was freelance and I was open to new work. And I learned later on they didn't know unless I told them. And that was one that I was like, oh, I was so nervous to tell people that. And I should have been kind of singing it from the rooftops to anyone and everyone of just not not to a spammy way, but just in a working it into conversation at least once with all these key people when I met them of like, yeah, if you know anybody, I'm open to work or I'm really available next month. Like I never knew where my next lead would come from. And the more I said it, the more gigs I was getting. So that's something I just wish I could go back and change.
I think this is a really interesting question for sure. I'm like racking my brain. I'm like, what would I have done differently? Like, what did I do? All the things. It's hard sometimes. So I'm just gonna give a little shout out to travel directors, TDs, which that is a phrase I only learned a couple of years ago, actually. And this is a very specific, I would say, like niche of the industry of people who are freelancing, and they are called TDs, and they do a lot of many things, but a key thing is incentives and things like that. And so I'm just saying this because, listener who asked this question, I don't know what realm of the events industry you're in. Like Logan said, if it is competitive or if it's far enough removed that you could do both. I'm going to assume it's far enough removed that you could do both. So if you wanted to start with incentives and do TD work, there's like a Facebook group. It's called TD Life or something like that. And this just opened a whole part of the industry that I did not even know existed. And so maybe that is helpful for you too. You could start down that path because it's different enough and keep doing what you're doing, maybe.
And get to travel. We love a benefit. This was inspired by one of BepCon's attendees who said, it's always the biggest challenge as a sole proprietor to know how to charge clients. As a freelancer, what are some things you need to take into account when making your rates?
You need to figure out what your time is worth. I think that's part of it. The other part is that we just mentioned freelancing is a great way to get experience. So you also need to just figure out how much you're willing to be paid to do something, because to start off, maybe that's lower and then maybe that rate increases over time. So figuring out what is going to be motivating enough for you to get out of bed and do that job, figure out what that number is. And I think that's a good place to start. And then you can improve it over time. And when I freelance, most people are coming to me with a rate in mind. I think that is the difference that I have experienced with freelancing gigs versus having like our own clientele, like through our business. People know what they can pay. Basically, there's, in my experience, less flexibility in freelance rates. And so if you're also able to ask them what their rate is, you might get that information pretty quickly up front. Logan, what about you though? Because I think you've had the ability to kind of like, negotiate your rates a little bit more than I have in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's always worth asking, do they have a rate in mind? Because everything's very arbitrary. Just the question makes me think like 2019 Logan was pretty excited for it to be getting told I was getting paid $35 an hour for some planning that I did for an event. Granted, I was coming from working in China where the cost of living was a lot lower. So the rates that they paid for events was a lot lower. $35 an hour felt really good. It's now 2025 Logan answering this question, and I would not work an event for $35 an hour. But I'm also 6 years more experienced than I was at the time. And so my rates and my expectation of, to Mary, your point, Mary, of like what my time's worth and my expertise has gone up. So it is really hard to know what you're willing to charge. I look at your financial position, look if you're the sole member of your household making money, that's probably a different expectation than if you're freelancing on the side of a full-time job. Um, and it's always worth asking if they have a budget in mind. I do now. I kind of have agencies know my rates, and I just now need to be better. Mary, I actually haven't asked for a raise from one of these agencies in like 3 years at this point. So 2026, we're going to be bumping up the rate. But yeah, I would also take into account if you as you start doing it, keep track of your expenses. If you're not big enough to feel like you need to have a formal like accounting software, at least have a spreadsheet. That's how I started tracking what you're paying for like a website, an email address, some of that overhead, because you just need to take that into account as those are expenses of like being a freelancer, to make sure then you're not lowballing yourself. So working for $20 an hour or $25 an hour, if you are someone who has some expenses, like that's going to be really tough to stretch that. I would often have an hourly rate, and then I would also have a day rate. And Mary, I don't know, I feel like you're the same as I am, but like I'll do, if I'm on site, it's a day rate. If I'm doing pre-work, it's usually based on hours, but I can times that by 10 to be like, if you're curious what the day rate is. But I don't have many clients who need me sitting at my desk working 9 to 5 only on their event. It's often like an hour here, 2 hours there, 3 hours there, that kind of thing. So I do hourly for the pre-work, and then on site, I do charge daily, or yeah, by a day rate.
I think that's a great call out because I do think that is more specific to like freelancing for sure is the day rate and hourly rate. So, start thinking of what those rates are for you because we have a colleague actually who hires a lot of freelancers and I have heard her say if she goes to someone and asks their rate instead and they're like they don't really give a straight answer, she's like then they don't really know what they're doing. So, I don't know if that's harsh or not, but so just have some number in mind too on your end. So you look like, you've done the research.
And I'll caveat that if you're like trying to just be like an event assistant, an entry level freelancer, you can be transparent of like, I'm new, I'm green, I'm just trying to learn. I'm not sure what my rate should be. Do you have a budget? No, you'll have some people who might take advantage of that and pay you like $10 an hour. But you might have someone who's like, yeah, I get it. And then as you go, for me, it was like every time someone paid me my rate, I was like, okay, my time's worth that much. And then I'd learn, because you're freelancing for an agency, they're billing your time out at a markup. So to the end client, they're billing you out as 30%, sometimes even 50% more than what you're charging. That to me was an additional like, oh, confidence boost because I'm talking to the client on site and they're happy with what I'm doing. And they're getting billed out to me at $90 an hour. Wait, I was only charging $60 an hour. Okay, maybe my time's worth more. So there's some confidence that builds over time. Your circumstances change. Maybe you don't like to travel, so you're going to charge more for traveling than something that's in your backyard, or vice versa. I know some people who just want to incentivize people to hire them local, and they've got a lot of travel, so maybe they do less if it's local. So it's fluid answer. I know that's a hard one.
It is a hard one. Pricing anything about pricing and rates is always hard, but hopefully that helps a little bit. And we do have another question from a Better Events Conference attendee from December. They asked, how do you offer an event or host package without being provided a budget?
This is a tough one. Yeah, I will always ask if they have a budget or the rate, just because that helps give you a benchmark for what they find it is expensive. So if they won't give me a budget, my go-to is always to give them a low, medium, high. So I offer three different options for them. Usually it means three different levels of support. So basically day of and maybe a little bit of one or two calls ahead of time. That would be my low. Medium would be like I'm kind of on call, but nothing really set. We're not going to do like multiple calls a week. And then the high being the like all encompassing, you get me a lot of the time, that kind of thing. And that just that's like education for them of what it would cost for you to work with them. I think I've had other freelancers send me like a rate card that just says, hey, here's the different roles, different, levels of responsibility on site. Here's what I would charge. And if they don't necessarily give the actual rate, they give a range. So being like, if you want me as your on-site registration manager, this could be anywhere from $35 to $50 an hour. And they give you a range because maybe it depends on the type of event for what they would charge. You do want to give them options versus just one price, unless that's your stickler price. I feel like you're going to turn off your client or your agency or anything by saying, this is what it is, take it or leave it. And that'll probably lose you business in the long run. Mary, how would you answer that?
Same. The package option has really been game changing. We'll do like option one, it's just day of event management and a prep meeting. Option two is like a certain number of hours. And option three is like more support depending on what they've told me, like all encompassing of that. And many times I've had them come back and want to mix the two together. So it's like take from one, pull from another. We're making this special package. That's really worked for us. You'll meet a lot of people in the industry like kind of like Logan said, they will not do that. And they don't, and sometimes they do that like specifically by choice. They don't want to cater things for everybody all the time. So it's a model that you can choose. But like Logan said, I've also found success doing the package option.
Yeah, and just overall for when you're working with agencies or as a freelancer, I will say generally you give them a rate and that is your rate for the year, like the calendar year. unless you're going to tell them, hey, every project it's different, which does make it hard and you might not get called as often just for how they put you in their database. That is something that like then you need to think about at the end of the year. Do you need to raise your rates? Do you need to change them? And then you don't necessarily need to send out like a press release that your rates have changed, but just getting ahead of anyone you know who might be factoring you into their budget to be like, hey, just so you know, I'd love to work with you again on your April event. My rates have gone up by this much. They're now this, to factor that in because that's just being nice. I also know you're welcome to tell them your rates have changed when they approach you for a project, but that just seems to be the assumption I see agencies making is that the rate you gave is your rate for this year if I ask you for another event later in the year.
Love it. Thank you. We have one last question, and this is a really solid question, I think, to end on, Logan. I don't know about you, but the question is, how do you find the confidence to go out on your own when there are so many other amazing planners already out there? Oh,
Yeah, this is a big question to end on. My mantra just continues to be that there are plenty of events. And when I first started, I mean, the confidence kind of came with time. When I first started, it was more like I think I liked events and I liked marketing, but I think I liked events a little more. And so I went out, I just wanted to freelance because I wanted the experience, not necessarily because I thought I was better than other planners out there. I was, I wanted to do it because it made me happy. Nowadays, for it is a point that you're like, well, why choose you over this other amazing planner? Or I laugh, Mary, I can't remember where we were, but somebody was like, oh, yeah, you two must compete against each other. And we gave each other like the funniest look where I was like, we don't, not really. Like we do a lot of similar things, but to me, we have slightly different styles in how we do things. And so we're going to be a slightly different fit for different roles, for different clients. Like I think when I first started, I wanted to be everything for everyone all at once. And I've learned that I will just click with certain people and I won't click with others. I will personally enjoy working with someone. I will not personally enjoy working with other people. And that's something like through trial and error I've worked out. And so I think that confidence comes over time of like when I find my people, those personalities you just like look forward to working with and seeing that I'm like, I'm doing the right thing. And there's more of us out there, that there's plenty of events for everyone. So even if there's another amazing planner doing their amazing thing, that doesn't impact me because I can be working a different event. There's not a finite amount of events out there. Mary, what would you say to this very deep question?
I just think that if there are so many other people doing it, like you said, then why not you? You know, like if they can do it, you can do it. That's 100% what I feel about everything. So I don't know if that's motivating, but I don't think that's a reason to not do it. I think that is a reason to do it for sure. And then also our industry is, we say it all the time, so huge. Literally, like, if you go Google how big the event industry is, it is, like, one of the top industries ever, like, because it's so inclusive, there's so many different ways that you can go about an event and be a part of it, and so, for that reason, I think that there's ample opportunity, you just need to find what works for you, and so, the confidence, I think just try it and do it, and you'll find that confidence, but don't let it be a barrier thinking that there's too many people doing it or there's too many awesome people doing it, because there's plenty of room for you.
Yes, and there's also so many roles at so many events. That's the other part of like, if you have a goal to work at the Olympics, like I did, I went to the Olympics as a volunteer and was like, there's so many roles at the Olympics. There's so many companies to work for that you get to say, I worked at the Olympic. Like there's no one planner of the Olympics. If there was, that person would probably not make it after a year because they would just be probably dead from the stress. But like there's so many people doing these things. There's also constantly new people coming in and people retiring or moving on to the next thing they want to do. We know the unfortunate stats of how stressful event industry is. So some people just don't want to do it that long. Yeah, we hope you feel encouraged by this answer. This gives you a couple tips about freelancing and power pose. You got this. Get on out there. All right, Mary, any final advice for people beginning to freelance in events, knowing we need to do a 201 to this
I
this
think just good, yeah, good for you for trying to branch out. I think that's the first step. You'll find what's right for you, and like I said, plenty to go around most certainly. So, yeah, I concur. What about you, Logan? Any final thoughts?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. The beautiful things about it is you are in control of your own career as a freelancer, which I love. I joke my toxic trait is that I love to convince everyone to freelance in events a little bit, do it full time or not. But I also will say you will not instantly become a millionaire being a freelancer for events. But you can also, one of my motivations for freelancing was I was the one writing the checks for the freelancers at my old full time company, and they were making more than I was working full time. They were making more working less hours as a freelancer. So sometimes the numbers work out. There's a lot of opportunity there. Hopefully you feel inspired and you give it a try. Mary, that brings us to the end of the episode. You have our bonus tip this week.
I certainly do. Okay, our bonus tip today is if you're doing an event and you're looking for an experience for your attendees, some type of activation or something a little bit different, try having book signings with authors, either local authors or authors that have to do with the theme of your event. Maybe it's just one author or a few over a consecutive period of time. It's a fun thing to do. I've noticed that attendees really, really like it. There's one event in particular where I help run the book signings. It's a large event. There's lots of book signings, lots of authors, but it's a really cool thing that folks absolutely love. So consider that as one of your activations or experiential moments for your next event.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mary, for that bonus tip. And as always, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. Send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can connect with us on LinkedIn directly as well. Just let us know you heard about us from the podcast. Send us that little note in there. We love to hear from you. And if you want more Better Events content, head over to Substack, where you can join our paid private community, unlock other bonus content, join our lovely private community where we have some message boards and opportunities. And as always, we thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.